Today is the 9th of June, 2015. Our title is The Results of the Primary Democratic Convention in July of 1980. And this was the convention of the Democratic Party to determine whether Jimmy Carter would be reelected. And Jimmy Carter was challenged in this primary as the incumbent. And Dave DeWitt is the co-editor of Athens News. He's the guest. And I am Robert Whaley, historian, retired from Ohio University. And this is called Athens Speakout number 334. Well, we reviewed last time that Gary Sick was still studying the Middle East politics. He's still at Columbia University, and he was a quiet scholar in the tail end of the Carter administration. And he was a great fan of Jimmy Carter and his presidential campaign for peace. And he wrote 2 books on a possible CIA conspiracy to weaken Jimmy Carter in that 1980 election. The first one was called All Fall Down. It was a history of the Iranian Revolution, and it was only vaguely suggestive of a possible plot. And the second book, in 1991, made more allegations. The first book, the idea of all of the players fell down. That included the Shah, former President Nixon, Henry Kissinger, his foreign policy advisor, Jimmy Carter himself, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor under the Carter administration, and the State Department bureaucracy and the CIA bureaucracy. All 6 institutions did not understand the problem of social revolution in Iran. The Iranian Islamic Republic was a total surprise to all of the Americans involved. And the problem between the United States and Iran today is exactly the same. The profits of OPEC, BP, the banks, and the possibility of Iranian revolutionary expansion in the Middle East. What Gary Sick did in that first book was to compare Iran with China, and he pointed out that Iran was simply too big for the CIA or the American Army to manipulate such a large society of 39 million people. And the idea of a boycott is not going to work over a 10, 20-year period. Iran can sell its oil to Japan or China and have plenty of outlets to sell its oil. So Iran, in short, is not a banana republic. Now, Gary Sick's second book, The October Surprise, focuses on October 1980, the last month of the election. And the CIA was vaguely, through William Casey and Zabriskie, beginning operations. The CIA began American operations called Operation Cyclone in the Afghan society. They alleged that the Soviet Union was trying to take over Afghanistan, and they paid money to the Pakistanis and the Saudis to try and subvert the real Soviet underground infiltration into a state that wasn't a state, but was not a nation. It was a collection of tribes. And after the Soviets finally got out in 1989, they finally left. The terrorists that the Americans were purchasing, Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, they now began to hit the United States in 2001. So the Soviet intervention led to an even greater American intervention in the long run. And that was the thesis of Gary Sick, who kind of predicted that the future was going to be difficult for the American president, no matter who he was. Well, anyway, our first question now is, what were the motives of Ted Kennedy to challenge the incumbent president in his fight for a renomination and re-election? Do you want to continue with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Last time we got into the history.
About Sick, or you got enough?
No, I think we've talked about Sick enough.
Okay,
I think last time we got into the history of the Kennedy dynasty with
yes, that's right.
Joe Kennedy's role
Right.
as ambassador to
Right.
England and an isolationist before World War II,
Right.
under the Franklin Roosevelt administration.
Right.
And Joe Kennedy was always pursuing political power. I think he instilled that in each of his sons. His first son, Joe Jr., died during World War II.
Right.
His second son, John Kennedy, became president and was assassinated in November.
All right, but how and why did John Kennedy become president, and what was the motivation of Joe Kennedy? What's behind his ambition for his sons to become president?
Aside from power?
Yeah, if there's something besides just power. Every politician who ever ran wants power, but that doesn't say anything. George Washington ran to fight the British Empire and preserve the independence of the United States. Roosevelt ran in order to cure the Depression and fight fascism. So he had a purpose.
Well, John Kennedy ran as an anti-communist.
He ran as an anti-communist. But what was behind this anti-communism?
What was behind it?
Yeah. What was the religion of Joe Kennedy?
Well,
what was the religion of the whole dynasty? Now what's the Catholic problem in the United States?
Well, the Catholics before John Kennedy, weren't able to be elected. Al Smith was famously throttled in
we're getting to the motivation.
1928?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And anti-communism was more intense in the papacy and the Catholic Church than it was in either the Protestants or the Jewish. The Protestants and the Jews were also anti-communist, but not to the same intensity in 1952.
What I'm curious about is we're building up to Ted Kennedy's run in 1980, his primary challenge to the sitting president, Jimmy Carter.
Right.
Do you relate that back to Catholicism versus Carter's Protestantism?
After Kennedy was shot, Robert Kennedy comes in, and he was shot.
In 1968, when he was a kid. And that was actually, the anniversary of that was just last week, I believe.
Okay. So from
June
the point
5th.
of view of the Kennedy dynasty, Ted has now inherited the mantle. And Ted Kennedy, for some reason, decided that he'd have to retire, and we want to get into that reason. Why did he say in 1968, when Robert was shot, he wasn't going to run for president in 72? He said, I'm out of the campaign.
Yeah, well,
Now,
by 72,
yeah, all right,
a lot of that had to do with Chappaquiddick.
Yeah, all right, well, I guess we've more or less talked about the Catholic motivation here and the ambitions of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Joe Kennedy. I think we've already gotten that. I don't think I want to say much more about that. And I guess we can get into this Chappaquiddick problem, if I want to say anything more about John and Robert, and the hostility between Robert and Lyndon Johnson. And so there was a family problem with the Kennedys, and the Kennedys, through television, had an inside track to becoming a dynasty. But Ted then got into a kind of a problem, and nobody expected him to suddenly get into the race in 1980. So let's get to Chappaquiddick then, if we have more questions here.
Yeah, well...
What was the importance of Mary Jo Kopechne to Ted Kennedy's problem?
Well, she was a campaign volunteer, and I believe a school teacher, if I remember correctly.
Well, not exactly. She started out, first of all, she lived in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
She was born to Catholic parents, Polish.
Uh-huh.
And she went to a modest college, Catholic college. And then she joined a Catholic secretaries club. And she got a job with Robert Kennedy.
Right.
In the 1968 campaign. And she was writing speeches for Robert when Robert was assassinated. And she had a kind of a personal crush on Robert. Robert was her father figure, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So she was a
Kennedy devotee.
Yeah,
okay.
There you go.
All right, good. All right, so now we come up to Ted.
And
what happened to, let's finish up the Kopechne story. Who was she, and what happened to her in...
She was a campaign worker
for Robert.
Kennedy,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And she was a worker for the political apparatus of the Kennedy family.
This is July '69.
And now, and then in Martha's Vineyard.
Okay, now we're getting up to Martha's Vineyard.
She was the passenger in Ted Kennedy's car.
Well, how did she become a passenger in Ted Kennedy's car?
Well, I believe they were at a party.
At a party.
Beforehand.
Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah,
that's the Kennedy.
Where the Kennedy compound.
For the new Kennedy dynasty, Ted.
Right. Well, yeah, after Robert's death, he became the leader.
20, 30 people there, okay? Big crowd.
Sure.
At 11:30 p.m., what happens to Ted and Mary Jo Kopechne? What do they do?
They have a car accident. Ted goes off a bridge.
How did they get into the car? Why did she get in the car with Ted?
You
didn't go into that story.
Perhaps you can enlighten us.
We don't really know.
All right, let me get into some detail. The reason for this is that it becomes a big scandal. It probably was manslaughter. So how does he get out of that? Ted Kennedy has a big problem. Okay, let's
well,
get
I'm sure there's all sorts of implications.
All right, well, let's get to the
and affairs
facts.
and
Let's
whatnot,
get to the facts.
but I'm not
At
sure about
11:30
any
p.m., Ted convinces Mary Jo, who, as far as we know, Mary Jo had never really met him before.
Ted?
Yeah.
Do you think not?
She worked for John.
And Robert?
Okay. Well, Robert's out of the picture.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I mentioned John. It was Robert.
Yeah.
So Kennedy is building up a staff in 1969. Now, he had presidential ambitions in 1969, okay? But they were suddenly canceled because he gets into the car. Mary Jo says she's going to take a walk with Ted, but she leaves her keys and pocketbook in the guest house, right? So this is a rather, and it's what, 11:30 p.m., rather late? And they drive out, and Ted Kennedy said that he was going to drive her to the ferry to take her back to Martha's Vineyard because this Chappaquiddick Island is a very remote island off the coast of Chappaquiddick. Mm-hmm. But he turns right instead of left. He doesn't go to the ferry. And then they go over a bridge. And Mary Jo Kopechne's in the car, and she drowns.
Yeah, he's able. They go off a bridge into a body of water, and he's able to escape the vehicle. She is not.
Yeah. Okay. So he swims back to the lodge. Okay. And it's his brother-in-law who says, "Well, you have to report this as the police." And
Trevor?
Yeah. And Ted Kennedy has a brother-in-law there. He said, "Well, what happened here?" "Well, this is real serious here. You're going to have to call the police and report this accident. You're not going to just get out of this." So in the morning, the cops come and they look at the car and they find the body and they find the corpse and so forth and so on. And he's got to have a hearing for possible manslaughter. But being the Massachusetts police, he gets off with a suspended sentence, and they takes his driver's license away. Now,
And they weren't able to prove whether he was perhaps intoxicated because
well, there's
the
no
police
evidence.
weren't contacted until the next morning.
Yeah, right. And the mother and the Ethel Kennedy and Ted fly to Pennsylvania, up near Scranton, coal country, and they have the funeral there. And the parents say, "Well, we're not going to have an autopsy of the body for religious reasons." So there's a kind of a mystery of the actual cause of death of Mary Jo. Okay? That's left in limbo. Okay? But there have been 4 or 5 books written by the conspiracy theorists about it. Okay?
Yeah.
In any case, Kennedy just can't walk out like this and say, well, nothing happened. So he says that in the 1972 election, see, this is 69.
Right.
So 1972, he says, well, no, I'm shocked from my brother's death, and I can't discuss why I got into this problem with Mary Jo. I mean, alcohol is a big problem here.
Sure, yeah.
So he says, I'm going to devote myself to the Senate. I'm not going to run again.
Right.
So in 72, he's out of the race.
And he doesn't run in 76 either.
All right, let's talk about 72.
Okay.
And the big race was between
Well, it ended up McGovern.
Yeah, McGovern.
In the primary, McGovern, Muskie,
Right. Was it
Humphrey was in there for a bit.
Okay, well, now we come to the Eagleton affair.
Yes, McGovern's great mistake.
Now, well, I don't know if it was McGovern's mistake.
Well, he didn't know. It was
Well, okay.
maybe it was his staff's mistake.
Eagleton is a Roman Catholic from Missouri. He has to have a Catholic on the ticket.
Senator Thomas Eagleton.
Yeah, Thomas Eagleton.
But what happened was that it was revealed very shortly after his nomination for vice president that he had had a history of mental institution enrollment.
And it was
it was very damaging to
it was
the
the
McGovern
Nixon
campaign.
administration who releases that.
Which is really a tragedy because McGovern was one of the best
McGovern,
candidates,
fine. I'm for
I think.
McGovern, fine. But how does Ted Kennedy get into this again? What does McGovern have to do
In the Eagleton affair?
in the Eagleton affair?
Well, I think there was a suggestion that he dump Eagleton and take on Ted as his running mate, right?
Yes, now it comes back because he calls Ted. See, Ted was not at the convention in Miami. He calls Ted and he says, would you run as vice president? That'll help the ticket. Ted says, no, I can't do this. I'm still under the shadow of
Yeah, the cloud, yeah.
Right. But he says, we can put Sergeant Shriver in as a substitute.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So Kennedy...
But that didn't end up happening.
Yeah,
Did it?
Shriver became the vice president of
Of McGovern?
McGovern, and
Did
he
it?
went to
Oh,
November and
okay.
lost.
Okay, yeah,
So the Kennedys are involved,
yeah.
okay, because without Kennedy money, McGovern could never go on to November.
Yeah, he could
So
compete.
McGovern essentially was left holding the bag.
Yeah,
All of the other Democrats were not going to campaign for peace. McGovern was just considered a disaster, okay? So Ted helps out McGovern in a minor way by bringing in Shriver. Shriver was better than no candidate.
Fair
But
enough.
Shriver was in charge of the Peace Corps. He was not exactly a hardened politician.
No, right.
Okay. It wasn't Ted himself. That's the point.
Right.
Anyway, that's what Ted did. And then he says, I'm going back to the Senate. So he sits it out. So what happens in 76 now? Ted is still under the river.
Yeah, and Ted does not run again. He declines to run again.
Right, but suddenly he's back in 80.
Right.
That's a surprise.
Yeah.
A relative surprise.
I guess
And
he
then
felt like enough time had passed
Well, yeah, okay. Well, okay.
to make his move finally.
Yeah, well, okay.
And with the Carter's unpopularity with
Right,
the hostage
right.
crisis.
He reads the polls.
Especially after
Right.
the failure
He
of Desert One.
Yeah, he reads the polls and he says, well, I can win. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk about the statistics then. Next question. What were the results of the primary election and the Democratic Convention in New York City, July 1980?
The primary election.
Yeah.
The results, I'll just read the results here.
Good.
Carter carried 37 states.
Right.
He had a popular vote of 10,043,016 votes, which represented 51.13%. Kennedy carried 11 states. He had a popular vote of 7,381,693, with a percentage of 37.58.
Now, what was the percentage of the popular vote that you have for
I
both
have-
candidates?
I
I agree with the 37 states and 11 states. That's easy to count.
Well, yeah.
But
it's
I have
not,
I have a different figure for some reason of the
Yeah.
popular vote. What was
You
Kennedy?
have 73% there.
And Carter got 31%. What do you have for Carter? In other words, there was a difference between the popular vote and the delegates.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what do you have for percentage of Carter? What did Carter get?
In the popular vote?
Yeah,
51.13%.
51%. Okay. I'll just check that again. Maybe I took the wrong figure. And what do you have for Kennedy?
Popular vote,
Yeah.
I have 37.58%.
Then he
Now,
was
I have-
less. He was less than. No, I have 73% for Kennedy, popular vote
For the popular vote?
in the primary.
Interesting.
Well, anyway, we'll check that out.
The convention vote, I have a different
All right.
figure.
Well, that's the delegates.
Yeah, those
Oh.
are the delegates.
Maybe I looked at the delegates.
The delegates, I have Carter at 64% and Kennedy at 34.72%.
Well, I guess that's what I did. I counted the delegates. That's what counts.
Well, yeah, that's where the nomination is actually decided at
Yeah.
the convention.
Yeah, right. So anyway, we got rid of that inconsistency. Okay. So anyway, going back to February, looking at the states, the race began in February of 1980, and Jimmy Carter went right out in front in taking Iowa, which is a caucus state. Now, Iowa is an old-fashioned state, and the caucus, you know how the caucus works?
Yeah, the caucus is different. Well, we think of primaries where we go to the ballot box and cast a vote.
No ballot box, right.
The caucus is it's a little bit more interesting. What happens is everyone gathers together and each candidate has their groups of people.
That's right.
And the groups of people gather to each side to represent what candidate
That's right.
they're voting for, essentially, casting their votes with their bodies, so to speak.
Yes, it's the individual voter has a choice.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's more democratic. Television can't.
Sure, yeah.
Now, later on, the television conquers that system. But in 80, it was still the old-fashioned caucus.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that there are 99 counties. and the leading towns in each of those counties, Davenport, Des Moines, and so forth and so on, those who show up on that caucus evening, which is in January, it's below zero,
Right.
have the power to vote, see?
Mm-hmm.
So when Dukakis ran in 88, he was totally unknown. But Dukakis, because of hard work, went to each one of those 99 counties and came in second.
Yeah.
And the Iowa caucus helped Dukakis launch his campaign.
And that's a lot
Because
of
the other candidates said, well, I don't want to go up to Iowa.
Yeah.
And they were going to win on television. Oh, well, wait till we have New Hampshire and we'll get our votes, you see.
right.
So a caucus can help some candidates and it can weaken others.
Yeah, and that's why it's a big part of the game, is because a lot of candidates try to position themselves to really launch themselves toward the nomination.
Well, Carter
with
is
the
the
caucus.
incumbent, so Iowa is a complete.
Yeah, he takes it for a walk in the park.
Yeah, right. Kennedy wasn't going to go out and win it.
Right.
And because this caucus would immediately raise Chappaquiddick,
Oh, yeah. of
Television
course.
would play that down, but these farmers, what happened to Chappaquiddick? Oh, he's not going to answer that. So that's interesting in itself. So anyway, Carter comes out in the beginning in Iowa, and he takes most of the states because of his incumbency, and I don't think we want to say anything more about that. Now, I want to say something about myself. I voted for Ted Kennedy in 1980 because Ted Kennedy had a good issue. What was his issue? What was he running on?
You'll have to tell me why you
Okay.
voted for him.
Carter had a very conservative banker as his Secretary of Treasury from Georgia. And he was talking about balancing the budget. And he gave very pessimistic talks about the energy crisis. And he was faced with oil, rising inflation, and so forth. But Kennedy comes right out, Keynesianism. I'll use the old Keynes saying, we'll have full employment if you elect me, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
So I voted for Jimmy Carter because I thought,
Kennedy.
for Kennedy, because I thought he had the issue on his side. But after the election, and after I saw what happened to Carter and Reagan, I rethought that whole thing. I should have voted for Carter.
Just to have solidarity.
That's not a question of solidarity so much as having this primary weakens the incumbent
Right. Yeah.
because it leaves Carter vulnerable for running against Reagan.
Yeah. Absolutely.
In other words, if you want your candidate to win, you should not have a challenger.
You can't have a divided primary for a sitting incumbent.
Right.
Shall we take a station break?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Good point. We're talking about the 1980 primary in the Democratic side when Ted Kennedy surprises Jimmy Carter by running in the primary and made a big splash at New York. But in the long run, it didn't help the Democratic Party to fight Ronald Reagan in the end. And I am a historian, Robert Whaley, and I'm discussing this problem with a current journalist who was younger at the time and didn't think the way I thought. But he is Dave DeWitt, and I'm hoping to bring a little historical perspective to why I voted wrong. I voted wrong because I was thinking of Lyndon Johnson and how Lyndon Johnson defeated McGovern by, using the old incumbent argument. So
It's interesting, but I think everybody kind of learned that lesson because we haven't seen a strong primary challenge to a sitting president since Kennedy.
I guess that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Kennedy was the last one to try it. So that was, I think what I'm really saying is that Kennedy is campaigning on optimism
Yeah.
and Carter is campaigning on pessimism. But in the long run, Carter anticipated the energy crisis. And the oil companies are able to, he raises the interest rates, raises inflation. Jimmy Carter is an appeaser, he's incompetent.
Right, and the hostages.
And Reagan just uses that Democratic primary to further weaken Jimmy Carter's reelection.
And the 1980, the 1980 convention, I have it here in my notes. That was
What's this?
30 minutes.
Okay, well, that's all right.
That was the last time that a candidate tried to get delegates released from their voting commitments.
Right, right.
That was the last convention where that happened.
Right.
So pretty much every convention for both parties since then has been predetermined.
Right. More or less. More or less. That was...
Which is a long shot from a lot of the fighting that used to go on throughout much of our country's history during conventions.
Okay, so I guess I'll come to the next question. What happened to the other delegates, the favorite sons, in New York in July?
What happened to the delegates when the convention met?
Yeah. What happened?
Well, there was a lot of political maneuvering and fighting.
Well, in other words, I'm interested now in the number of ballots.
Oh, how many ballots did they end up?
Kennedy knew he lost.
Yeah.
The day he walked in that convention.
Right.
So he wasn't going to fight on the floor. So Carter got the ballots with one ballot. Now, Roosevelt in 1932 had to have 3 ballots before he was nominated. Now, back at the Chicago Convention.
In 68?
Yeah, the big argument was to round up the other delegates from Connecticut and other towns and so forth and so on and win the uncommitted.
Right. You had the Daily machine in play there.
So Kennedy made an experiment that did fine in the early months of the campaign, but Kennedy realized rather quickly he made a mistake.
Yeah. Well, during the primaries itself, it seemed like there was kind of a horse race going on, but by the time of the actual convention, I'd say the writing was on the wall.
Well, Sue, who were some of these other favorite sons? Do you know any of them? There were about 7 of them, but you didn't investigate that. First of all, one of the favorite sons was Senator William Proxmire, who had 10 delegates for himself. You know anything about William Proxmire?
No, I don't.
Senator from Wisconsin.
Okay.
He was the leading economic expert in the Senate. He knew how budgets are made. And
he was Ways and Means?
Yeah, he was a Keynesian and so forth and so on. So I guess Kennedy, when he started, said, well, I'll pick up Proxmire's vote.
Because he's powerful.
Well, because
he wielded influence.
And because he had this economic knowledge. He was probably to the left of... Now, I don't know.
And Kennedy was running with an
we don't know.
message.
But anyway, William Proxmire was an honest Wisconsin economic expert and a senator from Wisconsin. And those delegates went to Carter because Kennedy withdrew quickly. He said, I'm not going to fight on the floor.
Yeah.
These delegates can go where they want.
It's about the halfway mark.
Yeah, we've done it. We've done it. Okay. It's all right. I'm glad you warned us. But you had to watch. We had to watch. And our television and the television guy had to watch. Well, anyway, we're on schedule here. So anyway, the second interesting favorite son was Ron Dellums. Did you ever hear of him?
I've heard of him, yes.
He's from the House of Representatives. He was a black. He came from Oakland, California, and it also included Berkeley. And he was campaigning on the ideology of Martin Luther King on the coattails. And As far as he
rights.
was concerned, civil rights was the number one and only issue. So he was a favorite son. He had 3 delegates. Third favorite son, Robert Byrd, West Virginia. What
Old
power
Robert
did he
Byrd.
have?
Well, that's a good, I don't know. Where was he? He was
He
a
was the s-
long-time member of the
He was the
Congress.
Senate Majority Leader.
I see. Okay.
If you're going to get any votes, he
Yeah.
took the place of Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson,
That much earlier.
yes, he
So
did.
he held it
He-
for that long.
Well, he got dumped eventually,
Yeah.
but that was his power, and he had 2 delegates. So he was there in the wings to maybe be the vice president,
Sure. Yeah.
or maybe get a job in the cabinet. These are why the favorite sons run.
Oh yeah. Everyone's positioning.
Yeah, their position. But since Jimmy Carter won, there weren't many new jobs. He didn't need them once he won all those delegates. But if Kennedy had come a little closer, there would have been more bargaining. That's what we're saying. Okay. So anyway, Vice President Mondale was the other senator from Minnesota. Of course, he had the inside appointee nomination from Carter. So he ran again, but he went to the convention. And then he built up his prestige because after Carter lost, Mondale becomes the nominee in 1984.
Yeah.
And then he was an
And he
honest
got whooped.
Yeah, he was an honest man, and he campaigned against Ronald Reagan on taxes. He said, "I'm going to raise your taxes." I've said it. He lost 49 states.
Yeah. Telling people you're going to raise their taxes doesn't tend to work out very well.
But the only way you're going to solve the energy problem, and the only
Oh,
way
I know.
you're going to solve the war problem
I know.
is to balance that budget. But all of these guys kick the can down the road, and the debt keeps growing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, instead, what we have people doing is spending more money and
Right.
lowering taxes, which
Right.
creates a
right,
greater
right.
disparity.
So anyway, he lost 49 states. He took his own state of Minnesota, and McGovern only took Massachusetts.
Yeah.
He didn't even take South Dakota. Because
Lost it, and that was his home state.
yeah,
South Dakota.
okay. Another favorite son, 4th favorite son, Senator Dale Bumpers from Arkansas.
Oh, Dale Bumpers.
Did you ever hear of him?
I've heard the name. I've heard some about him, but
Okay. Well,
I'm not sure what his
he was
influence was.
he was a dove,
Okay.
and the
So
reason
he
why
had the peaceniks.
Well, he was a peacenik because Arkansas is a dumping ground for pollution.
Uh-huh.
All of those, it's a waste dump, okay? So he then wanted to limit poison gas and atomic waste and so forth and so on. So he was on the environmental question, and he was also somewhat of a pacifist because Arkansas had a lot of people drafted in the Vietnam War and so forth and so on. And Arkansas is the most loyal voting bloc for the Democratic Party since the Civil War. And Clinton came from Arkansas.
Uh-huh.
Senator William Fulbright was the senator from Arkansas, and he was the leader of the Foreign Relations Committee from 1945 up into the 70s when he was a big, big pusher of limitation for Israel. He was a thorn in Israel's side, okay. And then he finally lost. But anyway, Arkansas then was one of the favorite sons. And didn't have many electoral votes, but Bumpers thought he could get some bargaining powers. But he had a very interesting speech. He eventually got into a scandal himself. And he gave one of the most interesting speeches for his farewell address. And it goes like this. You've heard many times that money is not important. And they will tell you that money is not the most important issue. Well, I tell you, money is the most important issue. And then you've heard it tell that they tell you many times that the all-time religion is more important. I tell you, money is the most important question. I thought that was really, really informative of politics.
Sure.
From the grassroots. So
Most politicians are willing
I heard
to be
that speech on the congressional.
candid.
This came on C-SPAN, where they show you some of the good speeches. Anyway, so that's why Dale Bumpus was running. Okay. Now, I had experience with money in 1972 when I ran against Clarence Miller. And like Dale Bumpus and like McGovern, I started out as an idealist. And the biggest lesson I learned from the campaign is that money is the most important question.
Yeah.
Because Clarence Miller was able to raise from the American Medical Association in one contribution more money than I got the whole campaign.
The whole thing. And it's only gotten worse.
It's only gotten worse.
The Roberts Court and Citizens
Right.
United and McCutcheon.
So I could relate to Bumpus.
William Kennedy has declared that bribery is
Right.
not corrupt.
Right. Well, there was a fifth favorite, not favorite son. It was Barbara Jordan, a favorite daughter. She came from Texas. Now, why was she running?
I don't know.
You don't know Barbara Jordan?
I've heard of Barbara Jordan. I don't know why she was running then.
Okay. Well, Barbara Jordan had legal talent, and she wrote the final report on the Nixon impeachment proceedings for the House of Representatives. And she had all of the details of the Watergate crimes.
Anthony Kennedy, I meant.
Yeah. So she was running on the theory that maybe there would be a black woman as vice presidential candidate. That was her hope.
Yeah.
Okay. So she had delegates there, and she was at the convention. But she made a big splash in 1974 when Kennedy was impeached, because she had television national attention at that point. And then the media said, well, wow, Barbara Jordan, she is good for vice president. She could be a nominee. So she still had that dream that that was her last hurrah, too.
Yeah.
She soon died after that from cancer or something.
But then Geraldine Ferraro came along not too many years later.
Yeah, she did. Okay. I don't know whether she was a favorite daughter in some other convention. But anyway, now another favorite son, forgotten totally, but you never heard of this name, Senator Jennings Randolph.
No, I haven't heard of him.
He was the other senator from West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And he was a Dove. And he had 2 delegates in this convention. And he was well known in 1980 because he got through Congress an idealistic bill establishing a peace academy which would be equal to the West Point Military Academy and equal to the Naval Academy at Annapolis, and equal to the Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs in Colorado. And his argument was we should be investing in peace as much as we invest in war.
Was he connected to the Peace Corps in any way?
No,
just
Jennings
separate?
did this. I don't know whether Jennings worked for the Peace Corps or
he
not.
propose
Jennings
that?
just proposed this to put himself into the national arena.
Yeah. And to get, yeah.
And he got the bill through.
Oh, well. Huh.
It was passed.
Yeah.
No problem. Everybody's for peace. Money, though. The Appropriations Committee never financed this, so that these historians who wanted a subsidy from the government to study peace got nowhere. I don't even know if I guess it's still on the books,
Yeah.
the Peace Academy. But every once in a while you hear, why do we have a Peace Academy? Well, we already have one on the books. The question is, can you get any money for it?
Right.
Well, anyway, it was an interesting gesture. And I followed Jennings, though, as a pacifist, as an academic, sitting here in a peaceful Athens, Ohio. So he had 2 delegates. Then there was Jerry Brown. You know anything about Jerry Brown?
Governor of California.
Yeah, well, he had 2 delegates. He might have been a vice president at that time. And then the old Senator McGovern came there with 2 votes. Senator McGovern didn't give her on peace. Maybe he could become a vice president. That would be if Kennedy had won.
Right.
He could, get on peace again. Mo Udall was there. You know who Mo Udall is?
I've heard of him.
He came from New Mexico.
I thought he was
He
out
was one of
west.
the early environmentalists,
Oh, okay.
and he was interested in the Department of Interior. And, well, Mo is dead, but he had 2 sons.
Yeah.
One inherited his thing in New Mexico,
Right.
Stuart Udall, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And then there is the other Udall from Arizona. He just lost.
Right. Was it John?
I don't remember now.
I know who you're talking about, though.
There was
or
Mo
Mark.
Udall. It was Morris Udall Mo from New
It's
Mexico.
Mark Udall.
He was the old man. And then there's Thomas Udall, I think. One of them is Thomas. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. There's only one Udall left.
Mark Udall was the former senator who just lost.
Yeah, Mark is out. So I guess that's the
Colorado.
end of the roll call for the favorite sons and daughters. And Jimmy Carter made another campaign for peace by going to the United Nations. I think I spoke about that before. He got a General Assembly vote charging Soviet Union with any meaning in Iraq, Afghanistan. So anyway, Jimmy Carter won on the first ballot, and he still was convinced in his own mind he would be reelected in November. And to compare that with the most difficult Democratic convention was the 1924 convention, 104 ballots.
Whew.
John W. Davis
John Davis. Yeah.
came in as a dark horse.
And wasn't he fighting Al Smith for that?
No, that was the 28 election.
That was 28, okay.
Yeah. No, John W. Davis, well, he was fighting against a big candidate by the name of Leonard Wood,
Okay.
whose name has been forgotten. But there's still a Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. But Leonard Wood was one of the big heroes of World War I.
I see.
So he was going to run as a president. And there were a lot of people for Leonard Wood, and a lot of people against him. John W. Davis was the compromise. And in those days, the South and the North were still fighting the Civil War. And West Virginia was a compromise border state. And that's why he got the nomination as a dark horse. And he was the ancestor of Vance, Cyrus Vance.
Oh, really?
Cyrus Vance was related to John W. Davis from West Virginia.
Realize that.
And he went to law school and so forth.
Yeah.
So that's how politics has got a little hereditary element.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you got to keep these religions and states straight if you're going to be a campaigner. It's not just all television. That's, I guess, all I want to say about that, I guess. Well, okay, I guess we're somewhat near the conclusion. Last question then. What are the conclusions of Carter's accomplishment as president going back to 1976? How would you evaluate that?
Well, I think...
From a historian's point of view, I guess.
I think he had a lot of things working against him.
Yes, that's true. He lost.
he was an idealist.
He was an idealist.
And he did push some of his ideological agenda forward successfully. But I think time and circumstance dealt him some difficult cards.
That's true.
And I don't think he was able to overcome a bad deal.
No, he lost. It was obvious he lost.
Yeah. I think looking back, I consider him underappreciated.
That's, you and I agree on that. And that 99% of the American people don't know who Carter is.
Right.
And they don't know who McGovern is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems of Barack Obama. He doesn't know what he's going to do in the Middle East.
Yeah.
He doesn't learn from history.
No. No, he's trying different things, and it's kind of...
Okay, so summarizing, I would say in 1976, Jimmy Carter campaigned for détente with China, continuing Kissinger's opening the door. He dropped the term Cold War, and he was talking about détente with the Soviet Union, and got at least a gesture toward nuclear disarmament with SALT II. And his first 3 years seemed to be a success. And then in June of '79, the war clouds came with the Iranian Revolution and the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. And he tried to free the 52 hostages by force. It failed. So he lost more prestige on that. And it was Zbigniew Brzezinski that concluded after SALT II that there was going to be a new Cold War. And he convinced Carter to launch Operation Cyclone, which was an experiment as far as Carter was concerned. But Reagan picked that up and expanded it, spent billions, and it got deeper. We only have 5 minutes left. Well, we're on the conclusion. I'll finish up this conclusion. You can interrupt at any time here. So anyway, Reagan then expanded, right, and Reagan. Well, I want to say something about Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin signed the peace accord at Camp David with Anwar Sadat, and it looked like Carter was going to get credit for that. But as soon as he signed that, and as soon as he gets back to Israel, he repudiates his signature.
Yeah.
And he starts planning for another Israeli intervention against the Palestinians. Yet, Menachem Begin got the Nobel Peace Prize, but Jimmy Carter was denied that Peace Prize. And of course, Anwar Sadat got the Peace Prize. So, Jimmy Carter's peacemaking didn't always pay off for Jimmy Carter personally, but I think he was a patriot for the United States. Well, anyway, the fifth war then, Ronald Reagan opens the door, and Menachem Begin attacks the PLO and invades Lebanon, and that turned out to be the most costly war for the Israeli government. They lost more soldiers in that war than the other 4 wars put together. So we don't have good statistics on the number of Israeli losses and Arab losses. Now, since the Fifth War, we have another 2 or 3 other campaigns, which could be called wars. So I don't know whether you want to stop with 5 or talk about 6 and 7 wars. Palestine. So anyway, the Israeli problem is still with us.
Right. That's the upshot.
That's the upshot. Okay. Let me see if I have any other comments to say. Carter did have a shallow understanding of his history. And he did not know much about the history of the United States from George Washington to Richard Nixon. So his idea of going from governor to the president was a short-term belief that he had opened in 1976. But when he got into office, he found that the military-industrial complex and the power of the oil companies and the power of the Israeli lobby are too big to solve by one president. And he became an elder statesman, and he's written about a dozen books.
And he's become very good since his presidency.
Right.
I think when he was president, he had too much of a mechanical engineer's mind for
that was one of his problems.
The art
that
right. Politics requires.
Right. And then he did study some history. Why did I lose? And he discovered, the Middle East is much more complicated. And the Israeli problem is much more complicated. But he's lost ground among Zionist Jews. They don't want to see his reputation advanced. And I think one of Obama's big mistake. See, Clinton did consult Carter. Mm-hmm. And Carter did help in the Haiti affair by going there and being a negotiator. But this is one of the things I hold against Obama. He never consulted Clinton. So what kind of a Christian is Obama? Dubious. So I guess I'm near my conclusion, unless you want to have something to add in your few minutes that I have missed.
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay, so I guess we can conclude with our famous slogan, debate is the oxygen of democracy. And I think that these debates and why a president runs, he should have in mind a model. Kennedy had in mind Franklin Roosevelt as his model, and he was a relatively successful president. Johnson had in his mind
probably Franklin Roosevelt.
Well,
that was his great hero.
That he started out that way.
Yeah, but then he turned into
he got into the military-industrial complex.
The fog of war.
So we've said our piece.
Well, thank you, Professor.
Right. See you next. Well, I don't know.
We'll see you soon. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Well.